Hey, welcome to Integrative Preparedness. I'm Steve Smith. Well, I have a subject for you all today, and that is slavery. Slavery in an SHTF world after everything has gone away, after everything has come down. You know, a lot of people have thought about some of the more gruesome things in a future, in a world without rule of law, what they call RAW, or Teotihuacan, the end of the world as we know it. Some have touched on cannibalism. I've touched on that. I touched on that in my second book. Not a lot of people have gotten into the kind of the idea and the concept and the possibility of what I would argue would be the certainty of slavery. And I'm getting into that. I've touched on it a little bit in my fourth and fifth books, and I'm getting into it more in the sixth book. By the way, I forgot to welcome everybody, especially our new subscribers on both YouTube and Patreon. Both channels keep growing and growing. I'll say more in a minute about what Patreon is and invite you all over there. Maybe I should do that now, because I'm going to put another something related to this one today over on Patreon. For those of you interested in getting more into the depth of things, that's what Patreon is for. The purpose of that is that there's just a lot of things we can't get into on YouTube. That the audience wouldn't be appropriate, to be real honest. Throwing some of these more serious subjects out into the broad spectrum of YouTube just brings too many trash comments from travelers and trolls. You know, these are people that aren't serious about it. They, we know who they are, right? And there's certain things that I can't say on YouTube. And besides that, it gives us an ability to get into deeper subjects on Patreon that it does on YouTube, and it's only $1 a month. You can find that, walking through the parking lot at the grocery store, laying on the ground. To give you an idea of some of the things that I've put up just in the last week over on Patreon that aren't here. First, choosing a handgun for beginners, fighting for your life. That's something that a lot of people really don't know. Well, it's something that most people don't have any idea about, because most people haven't had to do it. One man building clearing. The thing that makes all the difference, I won't say what that is, but that's what it's for over there, because these are things that I just don't want to talk about when the broad audience of YouTube. This is for people who really want to get down and learn a lot more. Nothing bad about people who don't want to, and that's what some of these other things on YouTube are for, but you really get so much more on Patreon. And then the truth about shot placement. And the reason that I don't put these on, well, that's obvious. The truth about shot placement, and most people don't know the truth about. Like so much in the not just the preparedness world, I guess, but pretty much anything, people have a tendency to believe the noise. They have a lot of, one person says one thing and then somebody takes that up and they keep saying it, becomes a truism, and then everybody believes it. And a lot of times it's just not right. It's just wrong. So that's what Patreon is, and I invite you to come over there, because if you're truly interested in becoming more prepared, these are the things you really need to know. And I just can't, I don't want to put these things on YouTube anymore, simply because, first off, they'll demonetize it, which means that they don't promote it, which means nobody sees it. And secondly, it takes someone who seriously wants to learn to be able to do something with the information, okay? And we don't have a bunch of trolls and argumenters over there, and I don't have to spend half of my time weeding the garden of stupid comments. So all of you people who are fantastic people here on YouTube, you need to be over there. It's only $1 a month, for crying out loud. Like I said, you can find that walking from your car to the grocery store and looking on the ground in a month, okay? Okay, back to slavery. The limitations of what most people know about and think about slavery is what they have been told about slavery in the United States from the 1600s through the mid-1800s. Most of that is very misleading too. And I've made some in the past on that. I'm going to make more on that over on Patreon, because if you think that, you know, the common knowledge is true, is because that's what you've been taught and you haven't had the opportunity to learn the truth. Okay, I'll just put it that way. But we're not going to talk about that. The reality of slavery is it's one of the basic elements of society since the beginning of time. It has always been with us. It will always be with us. Okay, and to think that it's not, you know, is just avoiding one of life's main truths. Why? Because there will always be people who are more powerful than others. There will always be people who want control over other people. There will always be people who either can't or won't defend themselves or stand up against it. For whatever reason, there will always be slavery. Now, like I say, I've touched on a couple of the more gruesome things in a grid down world, one being cannibalism. I did that in book 2. And then I started getting into the concept of slavery. As I start getting into it, I started studying more about different, how should I put this? Let me back up here a minute. One of the elements that started, I think, in the 4th book, mentioned a little bit in the 5th book, and now I'm developing in the 6th book, is a group coming down out of Minnesota wanting to establish a new empire built on, not only on, but a main part of which is slavery. Okay? That's going to happen. If you know, it happens in today's world. Like I said, there's more slavery now than, I won't say at any time in history as far as, you know, a percentage of the people, but it's widespread. I'll give you an example. I bought a girl in, when was it? It'd be the early 80s, as a part of a federal investigation. And I'm not going to get, I will tell that story on Patreon. This is another one of those things. I'm not going to tell it on YouTube. I will tell that story on Patreon, because slavery is alive and well across the world. It's alive and well in the United States, even though they give it this politically, you know, centered term of human trafficking. It's slavery. People are bought, sold, used, owned, everything, all over the world. And as bad as it is now, to even try to imagine what it's going to be like when everything collapses, I think is beyond the ability of most people to understand, to even fathom, to even picture. And yet it's important, because you'll be surprised when you start to really internalize that. It starts to have an effect on the way you think about people, about things, about prepping, about everything. You know, you think about, who do you want to belong to? You know, that's not the first question. First off, do you want to belong to anybody? The answer, for most people, I assume, would be no. I don't know. Maybe there are some that say yes. I don't know. But if you don't want somebody to own you, then you need to be able to keep that from happening. As I got into, and maybe I should mention my books here, for those who don't know, who just stumbled across this, who don't know that I wrote the Stonemont series. There they are, 5 books so far, working on the 6th. It started off with the reversion, about the collapse of the world after a CME. As I say, when the world collapsed, some were ready to start over. And that's what preparedness is all about. Are you ready to start over when things collapse in whatever way you think they may collapse? The 2nd book was the revival. There we go. The 3rd book is the renewal. I'm not very good at this. I either hide my face or I hide the book or something. I need a spokesmodel, don't I? The 4th one is an appeal to heaven. And the 5th one, in which we start really kind of getting into this slavery situation, is the blessings of freedom. Interesting that it would be included in the blessings of freedom. But the scenario, one of the scenarios, and what I write about too, there's more than one group that starts trying to build empires. I won't say totally based on, but to an extent, having slavery as an integral part of it, and there will be others besides this, is a Somali warlord who's coming down out of Minnesota, coming through Iowa, Nebraska, coming down to the center of where our story is taking place, with the idea that he is going to establish a new caliphate. Now, because this is Islamic based, and others are not, I did some research, and I did some digging into exactly what does Islam feel about or think about slavery. Okay. Now, we know that there are groups out there who feel that it is an important part of their call. Now, before I get into this too much more, I want to stress that in none of the three major religions is slavery forbidden. Okay, so that negates the need for anyone to come on and said, well, Jesus never spoke against slavery. Okay, well, I'm not getting into that argument. They do not preclude, meaning they do not negate slavery in the Quran. They do not negate slavery in the Old Testament. They do not negate slavery in the New Testament. As a matter of fact, they simply say, treat your slaves well. So this is not an argument about is slavery good or bad, okay, or right or wrong. That's not what this argument is about. As a matter of fact, it's not an argument. It's kind of a thought process. It's a question to you. It's a lesson that if the world falls apart, there will be slavery. People will be a currency. They will be traded and bought and sold, used and whatever. To this end, because I'm not a student of Islam, I know very little about it. It's never been something that I was particularly interested in. I looked up some YouTube videos on this, and I'm going to put them. See, this video, the one that I'm doing now for you newer people, will go on YouTube. It will also go on Patreon. And on the one that goes on Patreon, then I'm going to put the links to some following videos. And that's kind of where Patreon becomes more of a resource than the YouTube videos. So those who are interested can get even deeper and deeper into it. By the way, one of our patrons over there, Hondo Bob, has put up some amazing information on EMP and CME in our community section on Patreon. Okay, and I probably forgot to tell you, the link to get to the Patreon channel is down below. It's patreon.com/integrative preparedness. And there's a lot of discussion about EMP, CME, a lot of wrong information, a lot of guesstimates, estimates. I heard this, I heard that. And even though I wrote a whole series about something that happened as a result of a CME, I don't claim to be an expert on EMP or CME. That was what I used as a vehicle to write books about preparedness and survival and the redevelopment of society and culture and communities and things like that. I'm not an expert, don't claim to be on EMP, CME, but Hondo Bob, and we have other brilliant ones over there, has put so much down in there in our community section for our patrons to use as a resource. By the way, thank you, Hondo Bob, for that so much. Anyway, getting back to this, I'm putting up several, I've written down 4, I may put down more than that, videos that talk specifically about the Muslim belief as it regards to slavery. Okay, now why do I do this? Because it is still, and you'll find, a part of the belief system of many of their adherents, and that is something that we may have to deal with. Some are dealing with it now, if you're familiar with Boko Haram, okay, or ISIS. They believe in that, okay. I'm not aware of any Christian or Jewish sects that believe in slavery or any other. Okay, so we're just dealing with reality here. We're true. I don't make any apologies about this. And I put down, first off, I put down a one on the history of the Arab slave trade, because the Arab slave trade lasted longer than any other modern slave system. And by modern, I mean since, the time of Christ. Matter of fact, many don't know that slavery was not abolished in Saudi Arabia until 1962. And that probably surprises a lot of people. So there's a history of the Arab slave trade. Then I put up several by a Dr. Shabir Ali. Now, I'm not familiar with him. I watched his videos. Very bright guy, obviously very intelligent guy. I don't know where he comes down on the spectrum of the beliefs according to the Quran and Islamic law, but he has a couple in there that were very interesting. One called Slavery in Islam, Sex Slavery and Concubinage. Now, when you get into this, concubinage, I don't know how to pronounce that. This gets at what are concubines? Okay, it's not just limited to them. If we go back into the Old Testament, we see that how many concubines did David have? How many did Saul have? How many wives did they have? We're told that Solomon himself had 700 wives and 300 concubines. So this is not necessarily, the concubinage is not a slam on any particular religion. What we're dealing with here is slavery. In this case, he makes one about sex slavery. And then also the historical roots of female slavery. He talks about that. This is Dr. Shabir Ali. And interestingly enough, he's interviewed by a female interviewer, also apparently a Muslim. So that was very interesting. And then we have another one by Sheikh Asim al-Hakim called Slavery in Islam. Now, one very interesting thing came out of let's see, what was the first guy's name? Shabir Ali. One of the things came out in him. It sounded very, in one of his interviews, I forget which, but I'll post all of them on Patreon. While he seemed to speak, and the whole course of it was, well, yeah, slavery is accepted, but it was meant to, you can give away a slave, you can free a slave in order to atone for sins and things like this. One very interesting thing that I won't say he let slip because he didn't seem like he was being sneaky about it, but one interesting thing came out of that. And he says, the one way to get slaves, the one way that apparently Allah, through Muhammad, said that that the Muslims could procure slaves, and we know there were other ways that some did it. The Barbary pirates, the first time we went to war, is taking captives in war, and that appears to be, because he put this in a present tense. He says so if a Muslim country goes to war with a Christian country, and he's putting this in present tense, the way that I heard it, then the people who are captives would be held as slaves. Okay, now we're into modern context of slavery. I don't really want to get into, I'm going to get into it in my books, but I have to be very, very careful about how I do it, because I like my books to be family friendly. I don't know how many people I've gotten letters from and emails from and saying how they enjoy my books. They sit down and they read them as a family and to their kids. And and they use them as kind of textbooks for preparedness and survival and things. But I like my books to be family friendly, so I control how far I go into some of these things. I'm going to go as far as I can, using scenes and situations and language that the discerning person will understand what's going on without being blatant, without being obviously over the top. Because I want you to be able to, I want your 12-year-old son or daughter to be able to read my books, without you having concern about it. But I don't really want to go into too much more detail here. I might in further ones over on Patreon, but I'll simply say this: let your imagination run wild. If you really want to see what slavery would be, and I think the people have been inundated with information about how horrible slavery was in the United States and all. Well, I'll tell you what, I've done a good bit of research into it. The stories that you've heard about American slavery don't begin to touch the surface of slavery in other parts of the world. And those, and don't anybody come in here and say, well, are you saying that American slavery was good? Hey, just delete yourself before I do, because that's what's going to happen. No, of course not. But the horror that is human slavery is beyond my desire. Let me put it that way. I could describe it, but it's beyond my desire to describe. So let your imagination run wild. That these powerful people can do anything in the world they want to this other group, what it is. And I get into quite a bit of that in my 4th and 5th book. I don't dwell on it, but I touch on it, okay? In the 4th one, I think it starts in the Appeal to Heaven. We start to touch on that, and then a little bit more on blessings of freedom. And in the 6th one that I'm writing right now, that's when I go a little bit deeper. How much deeper? I'm going to have to see what I'm comfortable with. But think about that. Think about that. And because if everything did go down, that's one of the things you will potentially be dealing with. And if that doesn't give you a kick in the butt to start preparing harder, I don't know what would. Outside of looking at the starving faces of your children, I think that would do it. So I'm going to put, like I said, after what happens for the newer people, I'll put this up on YouTube, and then I put it up on Patreon right after I do, and then it usually takes me 15, 20 minutes to put the links up. By the time most of you see this, the links will be up over on Patreon on this video. So I'm going to let it go with that. I think it's something that people need to think about, and I think far too people, I think hardly anybody does. Hardly anybody does, simply because they don't have the background to think about it. So I hope you will. I hope you will let it be a kind of a, spur you on to greater efforts in your preparedness efforts. And watch those. Come join us on Patreon. I can't stress that enough, because more and more and more of the things that you really need to know are over there. And I make no apologies for that. There's people that say, you're just trying to pump Patreon. Yes, I am, because that's where I put more of the important stuff. I've taught stuff all of my life, and I charged money for all of it, and I got paid really good for all of it. I don't give my tutelage, my information away for free. I'm happy to if and I give a lot here on YouTube. But anybody who's not You know, where they say that, you know, the advice is worth what you paid for it. It kind of falls into that. Anybody who thinks that anyone should give their knowledge for free, well, they're not a true prepper anyway, okay? That is not a self-sufficient preparedness attitude. And so I'm almost kind of sorry that I give anything to that kind of person for free at all, okay? And I get those comments. Well, if you really cared about humanity, you'd give all this stuff for free. If you want stuff for free, if you can't afford $1, you can't be helped. And so I have no interest, desire in that kind of thing. But for the rest of you all, I didn't realize I was going to get into so much heavy stuff that I would have to put it on Patreon, but apparently I am. And it's not going to, you know, it's not going to become a gun channel over there, even though I've got a couple more that I'm putting up about guns. It's about the proper handling and things that people who have not been in my profession, who have not had my experiences, don't realize about how to handle, how to use guns, what to expect, different ways to think about them. I'm putting up more over there. So that's what that is. Join us if you will. I hope you do. Until then, think about this. Think about how horrible things could be, because I don't think most people do. And remember that we prepare well today in order to live well tomorrow. And in order to prepare well, you have to really have an understanding of what could be coming. Okay. You all have a good day. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.